All right, welcome to the deep dive. You ready to go on a little journey with me today?
Always up for an adventure.
Okay, good, good. So today we're going to dive into something that might sound a little intimidating at first. We're talking about research paradigms.
Research paradigms. Sounds very academic.
I know, right? But stick with me here. Trust me. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to see just how much these paradigms actually impact your everyday life. We're talking about how you see the world, how you interpret information, even how you make decisions. Really important stuff.
Okay, you've piqued my interest.
All right, good. I'm glad. So let's start with the simplest question. What exactly is a research paradigm?
Well, you can kind of think of them like lenses, like a pair of glasses that we wear when we look at the world.
Okay, lenses. I like that.
Yeah, and these lenses, these paradigms, they influence what we consider to be, real knowledge and also how we even go about trying to find it.
So it's not just the what we know, but the how we even know it.
Exactly. It's the how that really matters here. You sent me some super interesting stuff to help us explore this, by the way. There's a whole journal article on research paradigms, and then this text on educational philosophies,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and a guide for PhD students on ontology. It gets pretty heavy. Oh, and an article about pragmatism as a research paradigm. Lot to dig into.
Oh, yeah, it's quite a reading list you've got there. All right, so okay, we've got our lenses, we've got our reading list. Let's break it down a bit more. I mean, what's an example of how these different paradigms actually play out in real life?
Okay, sure. So imagine we're trying to understand something complex, like let's say poverty.
Okay, poverty. Huge issue.
Right, exactly. Now, a researcher with a very scientific mindset, someone we might call a positivist,
Yeah.
they might focus on gathering data, like doing surveys, crunching numbers, that kind of thing.
Looking for those hard facts, the objective truth about poverty.
Exactly. But then you might have another researcher, let's say they lean more towards constructivism, they might approach it completely differently. They might spend time with people who are actually experiencing poverty, listening to their stories, their individual experiences.
So less about statistics, more about those personal narratives.
Right. For them, it's less about finding one single truth about poverty and more about understanding that there are multiple realities, multiple ways of experiencing it.
So two totally different ways of looking at the same issue,
Yeah.
all because of these underlying paradigms.
Exactly. It shapes their entire approach. And these approaches, these paradigms, they're informed by some pretty deep philosophical ideas. Like, for example, ontology.
Ontology. Ooh, that sounds a little intimidating.
It's really not as scary as it sounds. It's basically about the nature of reality itself. Think of it like this. Imagine you're watching a movie.
Right.
Some people, they might see that movie as a reflection of real life, right? Like it's showing us objective truths about the world.
Okay.
Others might say, no, it's just a story. It's fiction, a made-up reality, you know? Okay, yeah. So ontology is kind of like asking what's real, what's true.
Exactly. And different paradigms have different answers to that question. Now, let's add another layer to this. Epistemology.
Okay, epistemology, another big word. You can break this one down for me too.
I will. I will. Epistemology is all about how we know what we know. So, how do we acquire knowledge? Is it through our senses? Is it through logic, reasoning, experience, maybe?
So it's like asking, how do we actually learn about the world around us?
Exactly. And you know what? This is where that article on pragmatism comes in. Because pragmatists, they believe that knowledge is gained through experience, through the consequences of what we actually do.
So less about abstract theories, more about what actually works in the real world.
Right, exactly. And that's why pragmatism is so important to fields like social work, where you're focused on solving real problems, making a real difference in people's lives. Makes sense. Okay, so we've got ontology, which is about the nature of reality,
Yeah.
epistemology, which is about how we know things, and wait, there was one more, wasn't there? Axiology.
You got it. And this one's all about value.
Values, okay.
Yeah. Axiology looks at the role of values in research, in creating knowledge. It asks, should research be completely objective? Or is it, inevitably influenced by the researcher's own beliefs, their biases?
That's a huge question. And I'm guessing different paradigms might have different answers to that one too.
Absolutely. Some paradigms, they really strive for that pure objectivity, while others acknowledge that, our values, they just naturally shape how we approach research and how we interpret what we find.
This is fascinating stuff. I mean, we've gone from these big philosophical ideas to how these paradigms actually play out in
Yeah.
real life. It's really giving me a whole new way of looking at things.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole spectrum of these research paradigms out there, each with its own set of assumptions about reality, knowledge, values.
Okay, so much to explore. I think we're just getting started, right?
Oh, we're definitely just getting started.
Okay, good. Well, I think we need to take a little break here, let all this sink in. We'll pick up this fascinating conversation in part 2. Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around all that from part 1. Ontology, epistemology, axiology. My brain's doing somersaults.
It's a lot to take in, but it's really worth the effort because once you understand these concepts, they can help you make sense of like everything around you.
Yeah, no, totally. It's like a whole new way of seeing things, like you said. Okay, so in part 1, we talked about those research paradigms, right?
Yeah.
Those lenses we use. But I'd love to see them in action, Get a little more practical with it.
Yeah, okay, for sure. Let's imagine you're scrolling through your news feed, right? And you come across an article, let's say it's about climate change.
Okay, climate change, yeah. Hot topic,
Yeah.
literally.
Right, exactly. Now, someone with a positivist perspective, someone who really believes in objective truth and the scientific method, they might look at that article and focus on the data, rising temperatures, melting glaciers, all that.
They'd be looking at the hard evidence, the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And they might see that data as like proof that climate change is real and that it's caused by humans.
And they'd probably trust the scientists, the experts who are interpreting that data.
Exactly. It would seem pretty straightforward to them. But then someone with a more of a constructivist lens, they might approach that same article totally differently. They might like start asking questions.
Like, who funded this research? Are there other studies that contradict this?
Right, exactly. They'd be looking for potential biases, even in the science. And they might also recognize that, different cultures, different communities, they might understand climate change in different ways.
So the same article, but totally different interpretations.
Exactly. And then you might have a pragmatist. They might look at that article and be less interested in debating, whether climate change is real or not, and they'd be more focused on finding solutions.
They'd be like, okay, climate change is happening. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Like, what can we do today to make a difference? They'd be looking for practical strategies, things we can do right now, regardless of which paradigm you subscribe to.
It's about taking action, getting stuff done. Okay, I'm really starting to see how these paradigms play out in real life. And it's not just in the news, right? I mean, what about something like education?
Oh, absolutely. Remember that text on educational philosophies you sent? It talked about John Dewey and his ideas about learning by doing.
Oh, yeah. Hands-on learning. Super interesting stuff.
Dewey was a total pragmatist. He believed that students learn best by actually experiencing things, by seeing how things work in the real world.
So instead of like just reading about history in a textbook.
Right. They might like create a mock trial or build a model or something, really get their hands dirty.
Bring history to life.
Exactly. And that approach fits perfectly with pragmatism, that emphasis on experience and action. But then someone with a critical realist perspective might raise some important questions about that approach.
Like, does every student have equal access to these hands-on experiences? Are there some students who might be left out?
Exactly. They might be concerned that even these seemingly progressive approaches can actually perpetuate inequalities if we're not careful, if we don't think about the bigger social context.
Well, yeah, that's a really important point. Okay, this is making me think about like even just our everyday conversations. Like if you're having a disagreement with a friend about something, like immigration, let's say,
Okay.
a positivist might go into that conversation armed with all these facts and statistics,
Yeah.
trying to prove their point. They might think there's only one right answer.
Yeah, I can see that.
But their friend, who maybe has a more constructivist view, they might be more interested in understanding their friend's perspective. Like where are they coming from? Why do they see things this way?
It's more about empathy than winning the argument.
Exactly. And then a pragmatist might try to steer that conversation towards, finding common ground.
Like, okay, we might disagree on some things, but what can we agree on? How can we work together to find a solution?
So it's less about who's right or wrong and more about actually making progress.
Exactly. And a critical realist might remind both friends to, think about the bigger picture, the social and political forces that are shaping their views on immigration.
It's not just a personal disagreement.
Yeah.
It's connected to all these larger systems. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone from climate change to education to personal relationships. It seems like these paradigms are like everywhere.
They really are. And we haven't even touched on how they influence, how we make decisions, how we interpret art, how we understand the universe.
It's like, whoa, it's a lot. I feel like we've just scratched the surface here. Can't wait to keep exploring in part 3.
Wow, that last part was really something else. I'm starting to see these paradigms like everywhere I look now. It's kind of freaky.
It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, right?
Totally. Okay, but as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to make sure we answer the so what question. Like, why does all this even matter? Why should our listeners care about these research paradigms?
Well, for me, it all comes down to being a more critical thinker. Like in this world where we're bombarded with information all the time, it's so easy to just accept things at face value.
Right, we get swept up in those clickbait headlines and all that.
Exactly. But if you understand these paradigms, you have the tools to step back and question things. Ask yourself, okay, what lens is this person using? What assumptions are they making? What perspectives are they maybe missing?
So it's kind of like having a BS detector.
Yep.
You can sniff out the weak arguments. Exactly. And you start to see that, there's rarely just one right answer. There are all these shades of gray.
And that can be kind of liberating, actually. Okay, so it helps us be more discerning about the information we take in. But what about when we're talking to other people? How does understanding these paradigms make us, better communicators?
Well, think about it. Let's say you're having a conversation with someone who has a totally different viewpoint on something. I don't know, maybe it's politics or religion or something controversial.
Those can get heated sometimes.
Right. And it's easy to get caught up in this battle of who's right and who's wrong. But if you remember these paradigms, you can approach that conversation with a little more understanding.
You can see that their perspective, even if it seems totally bonkers to you, it's coming from somewhere, right? It's shaped by their own experiences and values and yeah, their paradigm.
Exactly. And it's not about agreeing with them, but about understanding where are they coming from? What's their lens? And that can totally change the dynamic of the conversation. You might actually be able to learn something from each other, even find some common ground.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we were talking about with pragmatism, right? That focus on finding solutions.
Oh, yeah, totally. Understanding these paradigms, it can make us much better problem solvers, both in our personal lives and in the world at large.
Because if you recognize that there are multiple ways to approach a problem, you're less likely to get stuck in one way of thinking, right?
Exactly. You can draw on insights from different paradigms, use different tools, to find solutions that actually work.
So it's not about saying one paradigm is better than the others. It's more about recognizing what each one brings to the table
Right.
and using them strategically.
Exactly. It's like having a whole toolkit and knowing which tool is right for the job.
Love that analogy. Man, this has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like my brain has expanded tenfold. Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
If there's one thing I hope people take away from this, it's just stay curious.
Mm.
Don't be afraid to question assumptions, to explore different perspectives, to keep learning. Because the world is a complex and messy place. And understanding these paradigms, it gives you the tools to navigate that complexity with more awareness, more empathy.
So the next time you run into a challenging idea or a heated debate, just remember those research paradigms. Ask yourself, what lens am I using? What lens is this other person using? And see where that curiosity takes you.
It's a lifelong journey, right? And it all starts with that one question: how do we know what we know?
Well said. This has been the Deep Dive, folks. Thanks for coming along on this wild ride with us. Until next time, stay curious.